Okay, guys, welcome to English 9. We are going to continue working on anecdotal evidence. So yesterday you worked with Miss Bickle or watched the video from me where we talked about that. So we're going to keep moving on with that today, and we're going to go over your CYU 5 assignment as well. So today we're going to review anecdotes. We're going to be able to cite them and use them in writings, and we're going to be able to identify anecdotal evidence as well. So some things I want you to think of is write what anecdote is in your own words, and think about sharing your anecdote from yesterday. So in your own words, what would you say? You might say that it's a story, it's something that is funny, or ways to relate, or ways to prove your evidence to somebody if you're trying to persuade them to think like you. Now, anecdotal evidence is evidence that is based on personal experience or short narratives. So when we think about that in our writings and when we're using anecdotal evidence, we need to think, is anecdotal evidence reliable? And the answer is yes and no. So the good thing about anecdotal evidence is that while sometimes it's really, really useful, it can sometimes be unreliable. So the conclusions are based on someone's opinion or perspective and usually not supported by data or of an event or an experience, and therefore they can have a conscious or unconscious bias, which is something that we also have been talking about. So anecdotal evidence is important because we all like to know what other experiences are. It helps us make decisions and learn from others' errors and successes. Stories can also be powerful ways to prove a point. So bias in anecdotal evidence, what really is that? So personal experiences and or your friends' experiences are not evidence of how everyone else reacts or thinks. So anecdotal evidence, that word evidence, I have underlined because it lacks verification and is largely based on very limited context. So where only one or a few anecdotes are presented, there's a larger chance that they may be unreliable due to cherry-picked or otherwise non-representative samples of typical cases. That's kind of just a fancy way of saying that people can kind of use their experiences to twist information around to make their story or their point support what they want them to support or what they want them to think. So an example of this is arguing based on anecdotal evidence. So here's an example of something that's been happening all over the world for the past couple of years, COVID-19. So if you were going to give an argument based on anecdotal evidence, this is something that you might hear. My friend got the COVID-19 vaccine and had really bad side effects. Therefore, the COVID-19 vaccine always causes really bad side effects. Now, that's based off of one person's perspective. They had friends who had bad results. Therefore, we can't just say that it's because of every single person's going to have that same response. That can't really be proven. Now, if we were going to base it on verifiable or empirical is a big word to say that something's verifiable or that we can trust it evidence, we'd have to go back and get text evidence. We'd have to go back and find scientists or experts or people to back up this information. So if you were going to do it based on that and not simply just the anecdotal evidence, it would be something like this. Based on a study of 1,000 randomly selected people who received the COVID-19 vaccine, 64% experienced mild side effects, 12% experienced severe side effects, and 24% experienced no side effects. So the bottom line here is that your personal experiences and your friends' personal experiences are not always evidence of a universal experience, but an individual experience. So this data is backing up that there are some people who had really, really bad experiences and bad side effects, but not every single person. So if we were going simply by the anecdotal information, it's your experience and your story and your account of something. can't necessarily always be the most reliable. So bottom line, the best way to cite and argue evidence is to back up your anecdotal evidence with data as well. So we're going to practice and we're going to go to CYU 5. So what we're going to be doing is 4 true or falses and 1 opinion-based question based off of the text and things that we've been talking about. So our number 1 says, one of our clients double their sales after changing all their landing page text to bright red. Therefore, changing all text to red is a proven way to double sales. So be careful. Is that a proven way to double all sales? Is it true or false? And the answer to this one is false. Although it's a great way to give anecdotal evidence, you could argue that it might not be the case for every single person. So in this instance, changing their text color to red was a really, really big and important, but for another company or for another website, it might not be the same thing. So let's look at it another way. So this statement, you're going to tell me whether this statement is supported by anecdotal evidence or not. So this says, my grandmother lived to be 100 years old. She never exercised or drank water. My grandma only ate chocolate and French fries. If she can live to be 100, anyone can. So this statement is supported by anecdotal evidence. Is that true or false? So is it true or not? What do you think? And that one is true. So we're not saying that every single person can live like that, but the statement is an anecdote. It is that person's experience with their grandparent to say that that person's experience included with their lifestyle had that grandmother live to 100. That doesn't necessarily mean that every single person is going to be, so be careful what the question asks. Doesn't mean every single person can eat French fries and live till they're 100, but that is the anecdotal story in there. Okay, our next one, true or false. So this is, my aunt had pink eye, but her husband did not get infected with pink eye. Therefore, there's no risk if I am around someone who is infected with pink eye. Is this statement based on anecdotal evidence? And that would be true. So it's based on anecdotal evidence, even though you can't prove that. So yeah, you can prove that the uncle didn't get pink eye, but you can't say that nobody who is ever in contact with somebody else with it is going to get it. That's not backed up by anything other than the anecdote or the story or experience that goes along with it. My best friend drives every single day without her seatbelt. She has had her license for 6 years and has even been in fender benders, so I can continue to not wear my seatbelt and I will be just fine. The sentence does not include anecdotal evidence. Is that true or false? This sentence does not include anecdotal evidence. What do you think? So it's false. The person's giving an anecdote or and a story and experience about her friend's experience with driving with no seatbelt. Is that true? No, just because she's been in fender benders and to this point has been okay doesn't mean that they're always going to be okay if something happens. It's actually really important. You should wear your seatbelt. And then number 5, this is going to be your last question for your CYU 5 today. You're going to go back and tell me. So in your opinion, based on what we have talked about the last 2 days, using PowerPoints and the videos that I've attached, what I've talked about, what Mrs. Bickle has talked about, what are the pros and cons of using anecdotal evidence in your writing? So a pro meaning, what is the good thing? Why is it a good thing to use your personal experience, to use a first person account, a story from your life and something that's actually happened to you? And then a con, which is something that's not good. It's not a good reason. What might be the reasons that you can't always support using anecdotal evidence? Because ultimately, what we should really take away from the past 2 days is that you should really be using both. You should be using anecdotal evidence to really buff up your writings and to make people, you have connect to something that you've connected to. But it's also important to back stuff up with statistics and information as well, like we've talked about a lot the past week.